I'd like to turn the floor over to my good colleague, friend, and co-founder of the Kellogg Innovation Network, Mr. Peter Bryant.
Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Kin Global 2015. And what a great theme, growth for good. I can't think of any better way of kicking this off than introducing our two speakers, Rich Kalgaard, the publisher of Forbes, and Todd Polman, President of Customer Development from Unilever. So a few opening remarks while they come and sit on the sofa. Welcome, guys. So we don't have any engagements to announce, honeymoons to announce, beautiful jewelry from Afghanistan, but we do have the coolest shoes of anybody. So Rob and I both were like, black leather shoes, those, much better. So what we're going to talk about today is Rich is not only the publisher of Forbes, but of a great book called The Soft Edge, Great Companies Looking for Lasting Success. Within that book, he explores what I think are the necessary ingredients that a company needs to acquire to ensure that it achieves growth for good and achieves significance in the world. Todd, representing Unilever, really brings, I think, a company that I admire greatly that is really aspiring to achieve much of what's in Rich's book. But, you know, it's all about Paul Polman, their CEO, set them on a transformational journey a few years ago when he set out the challenge that as a company, we need to serve society first. And by serving society first, that will drive growth in the company and ultimately shareholder value, and in that order. And Unilever continues on that journey and faces many, many challenges in achieving that. And I think is a great pioneer and example to organizations globally and what needs to be achieved. As Rob said, you know, this is one of the great challenges I think we all face as organizations to how to achieve this. And it's being demanded of us, I think, by consumers and customers. It's a very complex topic. It's got multiple layers. So in the next 45 minutes, we could talk about this for hours, obviously. But in the next 45 minutes, what we want to do is inject into this room some thinking, some thoughts, and some provocations that will inspire you in your conversations over the next 3 days and beyond in terms of how you can take your organizations and embody many of the principles and capabilities that we're going to talk about, not only on this panel, but throughout the 3 days of Kin Global. So what I'd like to do is, with no further ado, is welcome Rich to kick us off. Thanks, Rich.
Thank you very much, Peter, and thanks for that great introduction, Rob. I do believe that good will be the killer app in business going forward. And I must preface everything I'm saying by it's really humbling to speak when a giant like Philip Kotler is in the audience. Much of what you will hear is derivative of Philip Kotler and Peter Drucker and some of the giants whose shoulders I've attempted to stand on. I've lived my whole adult life in Silicon Valley, where there has just been great innovation one after another. But of late, I've begun to think that culture is going to be the killer app going forward. The culture will be the differentiator in a world of abundance. Abundance is something that Silicon Valley has created. Moore's law creates abundance, not just in semiconductors and not just in bandwidth and not just in computer power, but you think about the fracking revolution. It would have been impossible without bringing all of this great computer power, satellite imagery, and so on to bear. And so everywhere you look in the world today, you see abundance. You see talent is global, innovation is becoming cheap, every market is getting crowded. And so in such a world of abundance, what stands out? And my conclusion is that culture will become of greater and greater value going forward in a world of abundance. The other thing about culture is that it is the secret to long-term vitality. I used to call my column in Forbes Digital Rules, and I began to change the name of it in around 2009, looking at the aftermath of the recession, looking at the kinds of companies that were coming out of the recession, careers that were coming out of the recession, and wondering why wasn't everybody having this snapback in the recovery of the recession. What was different about this recession is that it seemed to be taking down business models and careers down for the count. And so I became very interested in looking at what it was that gave companies this kind of long-term vitality and see if we could parse out the reasons why. My hypothesis was that vitality requires health. If it's true in human beings, why wouldn't it be true in companies and careers as well? And when you Google around using the word health, one of the things you'll come across fairly quickly is the United Nations Triangle of Health for Human Beings. Now, this is a very simple diagnostic device. What you see is what you get. The whole thing is right here. So if you belong to an organization like Doctors Without Borders, and you're going into some impoverished part of the world, and your task is to see 1,000 people in a week, all you can really do is triage, right? There's no way that you can get everybody an adequate diagnosis with that kind of time pressure. So you whip out your triangle of health, and you try to assess within 5-10 minutes every person standing along the three sides of these triangles. Number one, are they physically healthy? Now, physically healthy in the affluent West means, have you completed a triathlon in the last 12 months? That's not what it means in the impoverished parts of the world. It means do you have enough nourishment, and are you free of disease? Mental and emotional health. Here in the affluent West, it means that we are well up Maslow's hierarchy of needs, as Rob pointed out. What this really means is, can people think rationally? Can they see the consequences of their action? And social means, let's say you have physical health, and let's say you have mental and emotional health. Are you going home to a violent village or a violent home? And the whole idea with this triangle is, if you're going to be healthy today and predictively healthy tomorrow, you have to be strong on all three sides. If you take any one of those sides away, you jeopardize somebody's long-term health prospects. Well, 2 years ago, I'm sitting in the office of one of my favorite entrepreneurs of all time, Fred Smith, who started FedEx in 1971. You might recall he got a B or a C in his Yale School of Management paper on overnight delivery, and he got the last laugh on that. 50 billion in size, 300,000 employees around the world. And I asked Fred what accounts for FedEx's success over the years. He gets up to his whiteboard in his office in Memphis, Tennessee, and he draws a triangle. It's the same triangle as the UN Triangle of Health, and he uses almost the identical words. He said, we have to be really good at three things all at the same time. We have to have a great strategy, we have to have great execution, which I called the hard edge for reasons I'll explain, and we have to have great cultural values. He said, if you take away any one of those, you jeopardize the long-term health prospects of FedEx. Well, I asked him for a little more explanation. This is what he said about strategy. He said, market, customers, competitors, that's kind of strategy 101. If you can fog a mirror and you're in business, you darn well better know who your market, what your market is and who your customers and competitors are. A graduate level strategy is when you get into the area of substitutes and disruptors. Substitutes simply means somebody comes into your competitive space. You've never seen them before, you've never heard of them, you can't quite identify them, except that you know that your customers are kind of leaking out to them, and you got to figure out why. And the big strategic question is, what do you make of these substitutes? Are they allies? Are they competitors? Do you try to acquire them? Do you try to put them out of business? And then some subset of those substitutes will become disruptors, which simply means they're on a very, very, very fast evolutionary path, faster, in fact, than the one that you're on, and they will come up your tailpipe very fast if you don't know what's going on. So the first three are pretty easy. The last two, I think, are what gets you into the C-suite of companies, the big leagues of strategy. Have to be good at that stuff. The second side you have to be good at is the side of execution. I called it in my book the hard edge because every one of these things named here are things that you can measure with precision. It's not that they're harder to do. The very fact that you can measure them in many ways makes them easier to do than the stuff on the cultural value side. You can measure speed. You can measure cost. You can measure how you're doing in supply chain and logistics. We're well into the era of the big data revolution. You can measure that. We're seeing things that we couldn't see before with new measurement tools. And you can measure your capital efficiency. This is where, by the way, CFOs live, COOs live, the head of the supply chain lives here, your treasurer lives here. These are the people who wrestle with numbers all the time. The people who live on the strategy side are the CEOs and the board of directors. What the hard edge is all about is relentless improvement, or what a sports team in the world of cycling calls continual marginal gains. You're constantly seeking 2% improvement here, 5% over improvement over there, doing it relentlessly, adding it up using numbers, keeping yourself honest. Third side of the triangle, now it gets a little trickier. This is the side of cultural values. I called it the soft edge simply because it's harder to measure performance here. You can really only see how you're doing in the rear view mirror over time. I think big data and analytics are going to provide new tools to let us see how we're doing in these areas, and perhaps some of you will see this as a great entrepreneurial opportunity. But for now, it's kind of tough over here, and yet soft has nothing to do with it being easier. It's actually harder to spend your time over here and to think about these things. Now, the hard versus soft debate is not a new one inside of organizations. You go back to the days of Frederick Taylor and scientific management in the late 19th century, and then the first great application of it, of Taylorism in Henry Ford's assembly lines. You know, people have been trying to figure out how to get better and faster all the time in business, at least for the last 130, 140 years. The battle is that on any given day, where do you put your capital and where do you put your attention? And the danger is that there's a built-in bias to put it overwhelmingly on the hard side. If you're a startup and you go see Mark Andreessen at Andreessen Horowitz, and you throw that great Peter Drucker line at him, that culture eats strategy for breakfast, you're going to be out of his office in 30 seconds. He's going to want to know how you're going to execute your business plan if you're going to get his money. Conversely, at the other end of the size spectrum, if you're a publicly traded CEO and you've missed your numbers and now you're on an analyst call with Wall Street and you say, you know, we put a lot of effort into the last quarter into our cultural values and that's why we've missed our numbers, you're not going to last long either. All the biases are on the hard edge. So why are the soft edges important? Because this is where you get the transformational gains. If you get the marginal gains on the hard edge side of execution, you get the transformational gains here. I just want to mention 3 quickly here, and in my book I measure 5. But trust, I call the force multiplier of all things good. It's the key to getting your employees, your customers, your whole supply chain really committed for your effort. I wrote about this fellow named Roberto Espinoza, who's an insurance salesman for Northwestern Mutual, up Highway 94 a bit in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. I don't know about you, but selling insurance, I think, would be one of the hardest white-collar jobs there is. Because you've got to make something on the order of 10 or 12 calls a day. You're facing rejection all the time. The marketplace is validating that you're a worm in the hierarchy of white-collar jobs. Why did you interrupt my dinner? You know, I can't talk to you now. I'm not interested in your darn product. Roberto was struggling, as many beginning insurance salesmen do. He didn't really believe in the value and the purpose of his career. He had a handful of clients. One of them had a life insurance policy. He was killed in a car accident. Roberto went to the funeral. Roberto was so discouraged about his job, by the way, that he cleaned out his desk 3 times over the course of 3 years. He said he became 5 times more productive in 5 seconds when the following happened. The 8-year-old girl of the deceased man got up and she said 2 things. She said, number 1, I miss my dad, and number 2, I know we'll be okay. Why did she say, I know we'll be okay? Because her mother said they'd be able to stay in the same house and she'd be able to go to the same school district. Why was that possible? Because her father had bought life insurance. Roberto went home, and it was like, do you ever see that original animated version of The Grinch Stole Christmas? And then the Grinch's heart grew 3 times that day? That's what happened with Roberto. He said it grew 5 times that day, that he now had a purpose in his career. Every time he thought he was facing rejection on a phone call, he saw a little girl on the end of that call, and it changed everything about his business. The next slide. I'm stuck on this slide. Can we advance the slide? There we go. Teams. I've got a book coming out on teams in July. It's called Team Genius. It posits that all the great work in the world gets done by 12 or 2 to 12 people informally, no matter what the org chart says. How do you create an organization that does that? You do it by staying lean. You do it by with cognitive diversity. And I wrote about in the book Howard Schultz and Howard Behar, who formed this great 2-person team because Howard Schultz, the better known of the 2 Howards, very analytical, very driven. Howard Behar has an empathetic IQ that's off the charts. And without those two diverse thinking styles, you see, Starbucks would not have been able to create the culture that they did. Book is coming out in July. Forget org charts, as I said. And the last one I want to talk about is what Steve Jobs called taste. Now, isn't this an interesting word that the late great Steve Jobs used taste to describe Apple products? I think you know what he meant when you look at an iPhone or an iPad or a MacBook Pro or something like that. Beautiful products and they work well. With any physical object, whether it's the coin we were given, you know what is meant by taste. What does it mean for a business-to-business product, and what does it mean for a service? And when you parse everything away, what Steve Jobs is really talking about is that in a crowded world, you have to create products and services that appeal simultaneously to people's minds and their hearts. In other words, taste, what you're doing when you create taste in your product service is that you're fulfilling the customer's own best vision of themselves. You're taking them up Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And there are more. I mentioned 3 of the soft edge attributes. In the book, there are 5. You were given a copy of the book. I'd be happy to sign it during a break. And thank you very much, Peter and Rob.
Thank you, Rich. It's a real pleasure to be here equally. I'm humbled and honored to be speaking. I've come here many times for recruiting. We have a lot of talented alumni from Kellogg at Unilever, but this is very special for me to be speaking about something I'm so passionate about, which is growth for good. This is, I think, something that Unilever has deeply embedded in our roots from many, many years. We don't proclaim to have all the answers, but we're on a journey. And I'd like to just spend a little time telling you about the journey, and hopefully there's some nuggets in there that are inspiring, and happy to meet with any of you after and have a short discussion. I think the other thing is that Rob asked me to speak because Unilever is a global company that does business in 180 countries. We have 400 brands. We really look at brands as brands with purpose that really positively impact society, and this is what accelerates growth of our business. Right now, my role is leading sales for the U.S. Most of my career has been in marketing, general management. I used to run our U.S. personal care business, spent some time abroad, and then came back. And I think hopefully the other thing that you take away is that there's something here that we try to inspire all of our stakeholders. So certainly financial stakeholders, but employees is a very significant component. One fact is that Unilever now is the #3 most sought after company on LinkedIn globally. And I'm deeply confident that this is because of the purpose of the company and how it attracts talent. But also in my role leading customer development, we work with all of our retail partners to really understand where is our purpose and where are the purpose of our customers, and how do we build that into our joint business plans so that this becomes a real longitudinal relationship where we build growth, but growth that's really good both for society and for our businesses. Now, why is this so important? We look at the business very much for the long term. Unilever has been here since 1885 exactly. And we want to be here for another 100 and more than 100 years. But when you look at the population growth, we'll have 9 billion people here by 2050, maybe sooner. And right now, the rate of consumption that we have in the UK and in the US, we would need 2.5 planets. So we will just outlive the planetary boundaries if we go on to the rate we want to go. And I think our also sense of accountability here is that as the developing world develops, that they should have the right also to have the standard of living that we have. And so it requires real transformational thinking in how we change our business models and to both grow but also do it in a sustainable way. So I think this is something that hopefully we've embraced, but you look at it and you say, the world is a VUCA world. It's changing quite rapidly, but what we've done in the past cannot be sustained in the future. And so where Unilever has approached this is it goes all the way back to William Hesketh Lever, and the fact here is that he was very much a social entrepreneur. He started in the UK in Victorian England when hygiene was, or disease was quite common, and his vision was to make hygiene commonplace and lessen work for women. And if you go to Port Sunlight there in the UK, you'll see that it's very much, pioneer in housing for employees, first to bring healthcare for employees, but a deep passion, and it created a product called Sunlight Soap, which is about making hygiene commonplace and having a real social contribution. So fast forward, Peter had mentioned Paul Polman, who's our current chief executive and has been since 2009. The roots of this are still very much there, but it's contemporized, and rather than just focusing on hygiene, it's really about making sustainable living commonplace and enabling billions to have a lifestyle and a standard of living, but also to do it in a way that's really sustainable for the long term. So this is at the core of our purpose. You may have seen or heard this. Unilever is a 50, at the time that this 2009 was articulated, our vision, we're 40 billion euros. And Paul, by the way, first thing he did was take away guidance from Wall Street. He said, day 2 in the job, they can't fire me. Well, they probably won't fire me, so I'll take away guidance from the street. And as Peter said, really follow the consumer and really follow, with brands that serve society. And obviously, then that has to be something that accelerates growth. And the vision that we followed is we want to double the size of Unilever while reducing our environmental impact and adding social value. And I think everyone in the company at the time knew how to grow, and that was exciting and inspiring. The challenge was how do we add another 40 billion euro business but do it with a net negative impact on the environment. And so we've been very aggressively at work to do that. And we define it as the entire spectrum of the value chain, including how the consumers use our products. And this is what actually makes it the most difficult. In our factories, and you go through line by line, everything in our sustainable living plan, we're very much on track to do this. The most challenging component is when consumers use our products. We don't want to abdicate not having responsibility for that. And so, for example, in shampoos, the more we sell, the more we use, the more hot water is used, and the more greenhouse gases are created. So we look at both inspiring many different ways to have the utility and enjoyment and great hair days, but do it in a way that's more sustainable, be it dry shampoos or be it partnering with Delta to have variable flow shower heads. So this is the vision that's really been behind Unilever's sustainable living plan. And as I said, this has been in since 2009. And I think the main message I want to plant with you here is that this is not about corporate social responsibility. In fact, we only really got traction on this when we disbanded that function. And we actually said this is an entire business plan. This is our business model. This is building through all parts of the business a real sense of what it means to be sustainable. And this is sitting in R&D, this is sitting in marketing, this is sitting with me in sales. How do we grow the business in a sustainable way? It cannot just be in one function called corporate social responsibility. And I think you'll see a picture of the brands. What I want to do is run a short video, and then I come back, and hopefully this will start to tell you the journey we're on, and not only from a corporate standpoint, but from a brand standpoint, how we see brands with purpose impacting society. So why don't we run the video quick?
At Unilever, we believe everyone has a role to play in creating a brighter future, and we've crafted our business model with exactly that in mind. Because we think there is a different way to do business, one driven by purpose, so that when our business grows, so does our positive social impact. It's a cycle that creates long-term growth, which leads to long-term good. And with products that touch 2 billion people every day, our potential impact is significant. The Unilever Sustainable Living Plan outlines how we get there. Help 1 billion people improve their health and well-being, have the environmental footprint of our products, enhance the livelihoods of millions of people as we grow our business. And in the United States, we're driving long-term profitable growth in a few big ways. We build brands with purpose, and that means not just marketing to people, but mattering to them. Dove is building confidence in young girls and women by boosting self-esteem and promoting real beauty. And Lipton is taking big steps to transform the tea industry from the growers to the drinkers. That same commitment to improving livelihoods is built into our work with Ben & Jerry's, working with Grayston Bakery to provide more jobs, and taking action on issues like climate change and marriage equality. Breyers, another ice cream brand with purpose, uses 100% sustainably sourced vanilla from Madagascar and milk and cream from cows that have not been treated with artificial growth hormones. In 2014, Axe embarked on a global mission to support peace, which sparked action worldwide. The Kiss for Peace campaign collected over 100,000 photos. And all of these efforts add up to one incredible brand, Unilever. To celebrate Unilever, we launched Project Sunlight in 2013, an initiative designed to bring our purpose to life and inspire Americans to take small actions that all add up to a big difference. But change on this scale requires collaboration, and these pressing issues we face cannot be tackled alone. We partner with leading experts and organizations. With the guidance of NRG, we are able to meet 100% of the electricity needs for our manufacturing facilities in the U.S. from one Texas wind farm. We work with the Closed Loop Fund to address the root causes of low recycling rates. And our partnership with Keep America Beautiful continues to increase recycling awareness. We collaborated with the Ad Council to promote diversity and inclusion, while working with Clean the World to recycle more than 1.3 million pounds of excess reusable soap into products that help save lives. We partnered with Feeding America, making it our mission to end hunger right here in the U.S. And in just the last 5 years, we've been able to provide more than 30 million meals to those in need. Our collaboration with Sunoco and third-party distribution centers helped accelerate our initiative to achieve zero waste to landfill, resulting in $1.9 million in savings to date. In addition to our partnerships, we're also championing sustainable agriculture in the United States through brands like Hellmann's, Knorr, and Frutari. Knorr saves water while sustainably sourcing their vegetables and herbs. And Hellmann's has set out to source 100% of their ingredients, both sustainably and humanely, by 2020, while working with farmers directly to spearhead sustainable soy farming. Frutari fruit bars are made with real, delicious fruit that comes from sustainable farms that do everything they can to protect our planet. Unilever's goal is to sustainably farm every piece of fruit that goes into a Frutari fruit bar. But it doesn't stop here. We know everyone has a role to play in creating a better world and a brighter future for generations to come, and we're just getting started.
So last chart, I would just summarize and say I think where Unilever's view is in the beauty industry and personal care. We look at it and we think that beauty has at times been a source of anxiety, and we believe beauty should be a source of confidence, and that the portfolio we have, led by Dove, but our rest of our portfolio, is very much trying to bring a different point of view in the industry and build self-esteem, build confidence. In the food part of our business, including ice cream and tea and core foods, we really look at this, and honestly, we're quite transparent now that over the last 20 years, we think there's not been the right stewardship in the total industry, that it's been more about adding artificial ingredients, adding caloric content versus real food, good food, natural food. And so we have a very clear, equally compelling vision in the food side of the business, which is rather than the gap that's created and caused an organic component, that's fine, but that's for the happy few that can kind of have that sort of a differential in terms of premiumness. And we're really setting out to democratize real food, good food, sustainably sourced, traceable, clean label. And so we're on a journey. We've started this with Hellmann and real ingredients. We've just invested quite significantly in our spreads manufacturing to go from 17 ingredients and quite processed to 7 natural ingredients located in Kansas, close to the agricultural crops. Ice cream that has no growth hormone and sustainably sourced vanilla. So Everywhere in the portfolio, we're working on this, but clearly we're on a journey and we're not yet all the way there. I think, if anything, the last thing I would leave with you is to join us. We also think about this quite optimistically, that now is the best time, with social media and the way that we can touch individuals. It's not just about us and our actions, it's about the actions of many. And all these small actions that add up to make a really significant difference. And so Unilever, while it now has a very clear mission and vision, is not trying to hold this in something that we want to be a competitive advantage. We actually want to prove that growth for good is a model that does accelerate growth. And in fact, now when we look at our global brands, the ones that have the sharpest social mission are growing 2 times faster than the rest of our portfolio. And they're more profitable. And then the parts that are not yet as sharp as they need to be, we're crafting and sharpening. But we have real empirical evidence that this model works. And we invite you to join the journey. And we believe that there's never a better time to make a brighter future. Hand it back to you, Peter.
Thank you. So I'm just going to ask a couple of questions, and then if we have time, we'll kind of open it up to the audience for a couple of questions. So I was reading the Financial Times, as one does, last week, or a couple of weeks ago. There was a FT editorial, and I just want to kind of 2 quotes out of it and then kind of pose a question about how do companies begin this journey and make this connection. So this is Thomas Cook. It's a story that came back 10 years after it actually happened. And 2 quotes stood out to me. The snag for Thomas Cook was that shareholder near-term interest was in direct conflict with the company's wider commercial interests. And the company took a decision that turned out to be terrible for its business, that focused on shareholder value. And that the company should have remembered that it was in the eyes of the public and not the law, and that it would ultimately be judged. So I think this gets to the heart of companies that aren't making this connection about that growth for good and doing good in society is a growth accelerator. So it sounds easy in theory, but so how do you actually begin the journey to move a company to that softer edge, to understand that serving society is actually a growth accelerator? What does one do?
I think it's difficult. I think it's very difficult for large publicly traded companies that don't have the founder still around to do that. FedEx can take a little bit off of its earnings and put it toward cultural values because Fred Smith still runs the place. Wall Street still loves Fred Smith. They have ultimate faith that Fred is good for the company, even though he's 70 years old. The challenge for a company like FedEx will be when Fred is no longer the CEO. Northwestern Mutual, company I wrote about, is an exemplar of soft edge values, but it's mutually owned. It's owned by its customers. So I think that privately held companies, companies that have the structure that Northwestern Mutual does, and companies that were led by the founders, Fred Smith at FedEx, Steve Jobs while he was alive at Apple, have a big advantage there. When I asked the CEO, who is neither a founder but a CEO of a publicly traded company, he said, it kind of shocked me, but there is no other answer. He said, you have to lie. You have to tell, if you think you're going to be able to, if you think you can grow 11 or 12%, tell the street that you're going to grow 8 or 9, and put that extra 3% into the sustaining and building of the corporate values of your companies. You still have to deliver, but you have to be able to, it's not a lie, it's a bit of a sandbag, but it's the thing that you have to do. It's hard.
So Todd Paul's not a founder, obviously. He came from Procter & Gamble, so
yeah,
how did he?
By the way, this is the first time in history Unilever's always had grown from within, and Paul was 25 years at Procter, a couple of years at Nestle, and then came to Unilever. The interesting thing, he started officially on January 2009, but he really started October of 2008, and he spent an entire 3 months doing a real deep dive in the values and the history, and he went to Port Sunlight and walked the streets, and really, it could almost become much more of a corporate historian than many in the business. And so I think sometimes it can start from a spark that's deep within the company, but I don't think it is actually requiring that. I think we're at a tipping point where, if anything now, with transparency and ubiquity of information, and consumers wanting to know the values of the companies that are producing their products. I think, if anything, there's a reverse coming where I don't think companies are going to be given the permission to grow if they're not responsible and living this sort of authentic way forward.
Yeah, you're kind of getting into the social license to operate concept there. Yeah. So, Rich, you mentioned the two Howards, but I think there's kind of instructive insights into the actual story behind that, and that, because everybody's talking about big data and analytics, and all the answers are in the analytics and in the data. It must be. So, I think the Howard story kind of throws a new light on that.
I'll compress it down, but Howard Schultz did not found Starbucks. He bought into Starbucks and became the controlling owner when it had a handful of stores, less than 10. Now it's a few years after, and they've expanded into greater Seattle, and they've hit a flat spot in their growth. And Howard Schultz is very driven, very analytical, very financially savvy, very competitive. By the way, have you ever noticed that people like that, who check all those boxes, tend not to be the most empathetic people, in the house? And he wasn't. And he was convinced that the flat spot could be explained by the data, and that's what he told the board of directors. And they struggled to find out why they'd hit a flat spot. This is around 200 stores, and they're still mostly in the state of Washington. Howard Behar, who's the opposite in every way, where Howard Schultz is tall and angular, Howard Behar is short and round. He's not analytical. He's a people person, empathetic, IQ off the charts. He said, you figure out this data stuff. I'm going to go talk to the store managers. Well, he came back after 6 months, and he said, I got one piece of data for you. Everybody leans in. He says, the store managers, he said, they're unhappy. And then he paused, and he said, is that enough data for you? And the old managers are unhappy because they felt like they were not being included in the expansion of the company, and the new ones didn't get the culture at all. So that was the moment where Howard Schultz finally said to Howard Behar, you take care of this. Howard Behar was the president, the number 2 at Starbucks from 94 until 2007, served on the board of directors. Since then, Howard Schultz has become pretty adept at this kind of stuff. But it doesn't come, he's had to learn it. The point is that these were two opposites in temperament, and the genius of Howard Schultz was to know what he didn't know and to give that realm to Howard Behar to build the culture of the company.
Yeah, no, I think it's great. I challenge everyone here, who's your Howard Behar in your company? And if you don't have one, you should find one pretty quickly. Todd, you said something very interesting, then I'll open up to questions from the audience, is one of the things Paul did very early on was a very brave thing, because I think he's probably one of the only CEOs to do this in a major company, is withdraw guidance from Wall Street. And I know that caused quite a ruckus. I mean, why, and what did that do internally to the company?
I think it sent a message that obviously, you need to perform, and you need to perform in the long term. But this quarterly madness and only working for the shareholder sometimes gets a little in the way. The comment about, are we managing for the quarterly reporting versus are we managing for the long term? And I think he wisely took the moment in time to say, we're going to do this differently. I think it also attracts a little bit different following in terms of socially conscious capital, and it was a decision that I think was very helpful because it gives a little bit of time to really inculcate the vision into the business and make sure that it is something that has a little bit of gestation time.
Yeah. So did it change behavior, do you think? Did people's behavior change?
Yeah.
Did you go?
No,
Did you think he was crazy?
I don't think that was the most significant thing that we should rest on, but I think it's an artifact. I mean, I think the comments that you've had around this soft edge and hard edge is very important. When we look at brands, we look at that way. Dove is an example where the brand has, over time, built, I use a diamond metaphor, brands are like diamonds, that each component cuts a different facet into it. Big brands have multiple facets. Dove has always had real women testifying to the role the brand plays in their life. There's never had models, it's all real women. They've had another one that's around functional superiority, so it's tough, objective proof. There's been a medical program. And then the final one was a bunch of us went off to say, where's the brand's purpose? And this was led by Sylvia Lagnato, who was a global brand VP. And we really then crafted this idea about beauty is not a source of anxiety, it's a source of confidence and self-esteem. And It's organic to the brand, so you couldn't do this if you had a different brand. But to me, there's both hard edge there. It's got to be superior care. If it doesn't have the functional superior care, it's not going to have the performance. But the soft edge is having that social intuition and making a contribution back to society.
Peter, that's such a great story, and I'm glad that, I mean, choosing not to give guidance. Because I was interviewing Michael Dell about a year ago, and Dell was the best stock of all American stocks, more than 5,000 publicly traded stocks in the decade of the 90s. Roughly 1,000x return, $1,000 at the beginning of the decade, $1 million at the end of the decade. And they became obsessed with that. And it created behavior within the company that led to this forced ranking system of all employees into 1 of 5 categories. And there was just brutal competition to get into the top category. And it led to people that they literally, as a company, Michael could see, though, these years later, it led to a lot of ethical cutting corners. Because the people who were helping make the quarterly numbers, they were valuable to the company. Even if they were planting long-term time bombs, they were sexual harassers, they were screwing up the culture, they were lying to customers. If they helped the stock price, they were good. The day that Dell went private in November 2013, he got rid of his forced ranking system because he saw how toxic it had become and how the two had become inextricably linked.
Okay, that's interesting. A case for going private, perhaps.
Yeah.
So we've got time for just a couple of questions. So I don't know if there's any, or we can just go. Any questions? Any burning questions out there? Yes, just lady here.
So I have a question about the Unilever brand house. So some of your brands, you can follow the consumer, and through empathy, you can create campaigns that tap into that, and you can grow your sales. But within your house of brands, you have other brands that actually work the opposite direction. So I would use Dove and Axe as an example of 2 different brand strategies appealing to 2 different consumer bases. I'm wondering if the company has taken a look at policy evolution and natural consumer preferences changing and started to evaluate which brands they might want to transition out of rather than keep it as a continual journey.
This is a very good question. This comes up often, and I think if you look at the history of Axe, the brand has also matured and gone through its own kind of evolution, but it's a very different consumer group, and it's it's young men, and finding a way that engages them into these categories in a witty, insightful way. We've always tested all the communication on Axe with mothers, with girls, and there's never been any intention that Dove and Axe are at odds. They're very different brands with a different positioning and done in different tastes. But I think if you look at the advertising and how it's evolved on Axe, this is a very important and growing brand in the portfolio. And we see that this Axe for Peace that you may have saw, Kiss for Peace, this is a very different point of view. The campaign, we had a whole line of Axe Peace and this idea of make love, not war. It's a very different twist on the brand, but in our view, it's also twisting it toward social contribution and this idea about peace one day. And we actually gave philanthropically back into organizations that support this sort of thing. So I think brands need to be true to their roots, but they also can evolve and mature. And we've seen that for sure in this instance. I think we have changed some of the portfolio. There's always some change in the future. I think as we look to acquisition, this is a very, very important component that, we've just acquired an ice cream brand called Talenti that is amazing. Yeah.
Ice cream fan.
No, and it's very authentic. It's curated. It's please try it. You will love it. It's amazing.
So my clock is telling me we have to do a wrap. So just some closing thoughts, and then I'll hand back to Rob. I think I will challenge you. I love the triangle of health. So if you think about the long-term vitality of your business, it might be kind of interesting for you to look at your strategy dimension, your hard edge dimension, and then your soft edge dimension and say, well, how am I going in each of these areas and what does it mean for my business and how to drive that? So Rich, I think that's a fantastic kind of metaphor to think about. Todd, I like some of your terms. Like one thing you said, we have a sense of accountability, and I might add responsibly. I think driving that sense in your business that we have a greater purpose, but also a sense of responsibility beyond us, just our company, is very powerful. Also, that disbanding your CSR group. And that's where you got real traction, because it stopped being their job and it became everyone's job. And we see that in a number of industries. When you stop making it a department's job and make it everyone's job, then it really takes hold. And that's when you make real change, real difference. Withdrawing the social guidance obviously the guidance to Wall Street was important. And the last point, I think, and we believe this in our Kin Catalyst, is that change begins with small actions. It was mentioned in the video. And change, whether it's in the corporation or in society or in an industry, you begin with small steps, small groups of people. You can't do these kind of big Uber shifts and changes. It just doesn't work. So small steps. So again, everyone, please join me in thanking Rich and Todd, I think, for a great, insightful panel. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Peter. Thank you, Rich, and thank you, Todd. You have to lie.
Yes. Or not give guidance.
Or not give guidance. You have to lie. Empathy. 10 years ago when I started here at Kellogg, that word didn't come up much. And I'm proud to say that Kellogg is a very progressive organization for a business school. The notion of social responsibility was a fringe discussion. And the events of the past 10 years, I think, are kicking some people to the recognition that we have to figure out our social license to operate and really our mission in the world. Why do we even exist? Why do we spend our time? Why should we demand value from the world? The store owners are unhappy. How many spreadsheets do we need to tell us that? Businesses are run by human beings, not by ex post facto measures on a spreadsheet. Rich said that Wall Street still has faith in Fred Smith. I think that's pretty smart of Wall Street. And he pointed out it's difficult to lead a business when you're not the founder, you're not the visionary who created it, but it is possible. And Todd's company proves that it is possible to take new directions as a bold leader, running a company that's been around for a very long period of time. Soon we'll be listening to 3 leaders at a company that's been around a very long time, all of whom I would suggest to you are corporate entrepreneurs. They're entrepreneurial in a very complex, very large organization, the Exelon Corporation. But before I welcome Brian, Ann, and Gary up to the stage, I want to tell a personal story about my relationship with my doctoral advisor, Don Fry, who was a consummate businessman, executive, ran a Fortune 500 for many years, and also an academic. He and I had an argument in my 20s, about Milton Friedman's assertion that the one and only social mission of business is to maximize profitability within the rules of the game. Now, this was quite popular, especially at business schools, for many years. All we need to do, all we should do, noted it's the best thing for profitability. What he was saying was our one and only one social responsibility is to maximize profitability. And he had a very good argument, a rigorous argument. There were others at the time, not just Milton Friedman, but also Jensen and Meckling and others. They made beautiful academic arguments, even some with Greek letters, that proved that the best thing we can do for society is to maximize profitability. Why? It's actually a very simple argument. If I do what I do the best way I can possibly do it and make as much money as possible, create as much economic value as possible, that creates surplus, which allows my employees, others to give their money to nonprofits, to support people in poverty, et cetera, to do the social things we need to do. But if I, as a business leader, spend time and money on those things, then I decrease my performance, and then in the aggregate, the overall economic system has lower wealth creation. This was a powerful argument. I bought it. And I argued with Don about this. Here's this business guy, serious business guy, telling me that that's not right. And he couldn't convince me, because I knew everything. He said, look, I don't expect you to buy my story, but I expect you to come up with your own. I said, well, what do you think, Don? He said, in theory, it works in practice. In practice, it doesn't. Now, he was apocryphally quoting Yogi Berra. But think about this. It's profound. In theory, it works in practice, but in practice, it doesn't. Now, what did he mean? He said, just as we heard from Rich, when profitability at Dell became the absolute number one, the increase in share owner value, then people made decisions that were driven by that number one focus. Now, you can argue, but if they make unethical decisions that eventually compromise the corporation, then they've made the wrong decision and they've violated Milton Friedman's assertion. And you would be right, as I was. But as Don Fry said, in theory it works in practice. In practice, it doesn't. So he couldn't convince me. And then later on came Enron. And when I heard the story of Enron, I read one of the books about it, I realized Don Fry was right. What did not happen at Enron is one day back in the 60s when the predecessor company was being founded, a bunch of horrible people got together and said, hey, let's figure out how to screw California. That's not what happened. They started a business. They built it, they employed people, they created value in the world, and somewhere along the line the culture shifted to we increase share owner value every year, year over year, at all costs. That is our number one objective, and guess what? It worked for a long time. People made a lot of money, at least on paper. And by the way, they were a very innovative company. They invented things that are still used today that transform the energy industry. They also did a few other things. So what happened in this process was not that people got to the office one day and said, let's go take down the energy grid in California and make a lot of money. What happened was people got to the office one day and they weren't going to quite hit their numbers. And they know that you rise by hitting your numbers at all costs. And so someone from accounting, not to pick on accounting, could have been someone else, said, you know, if we just do this one thing, it's totally legal, I've checked, totally legal, a little unethical, but it's totally legal, then we'll hit our numbers. Unfortunately, true. And they did it. And guess what? It worked. And everybody sighed relief, and they went on to raise share owner value, and another quarter came along, and we're not going to hit our numbers. And they said, well, we did this. Maybe we can do this. It's probably legal. I'm not sure. Probably legal. Well, let's not talk about ethics. And then you keep, because I did that, I'm willing to do this. And because I did this, I'm willing to do that. And eventually, we've now descended to doing things that had you, the same person doing those things, had you walked in the door originally and that was happening, you would have been aghast. And so Don Fry was right. In theory, it works. In practice, it doesn't.